Hey guys, Kiwi here. In this video I'll be breaking down episode 2 of The Last of Us. Warning of spoilers, and let's jump right into it. So episode 2 surprisingly starts out with another flashback to 2003, this time showing one of the first places in the world where the infection started spreading, Indonesia. Although it wasn't completely necessary to show this, I like the breadcrumbs that hinted at this during episode 1 while Joel and Sarah were having breakfast. This flashback was never in the games, and it makes me wonder if the show's going to continue doing flashbacks like this throughout this season, as the show really seems to be focusing on the realism of the fungus and what created this apocalypse. I do love the moment where the professor's told that there's 14 potentially infected workers unaccounted for, as she brutally suggests bombing the city due to realizing that it's already uncontrollable. Back in the current timeline, we get elaboration for Ellie's immunity, which is something that I really enjoy since it felt like the end of episode 1 just kinda glossed over it. Joel and Tess bicker back and forth until Joel reluctantly agrees with Tess to continue escorting Ellie to the Fireflies, but not before some cringe involving Ellie pretending to be infected herself. Also, Ellie asks for a gun multiple times in this episode, which seems a little early considering they just linked up with her. Now, I feel this way because Joel learning to trust Ellie with a gun is a fairly big story beat from the game, but it's something that wouldn't happen until like episode 3 to 4 of the show. It's fine to see the show is remixing certain events around from the game as long as it fits, so I assume that Ellie asking for a gun multiple times in episode 2 is just set up for that Joel and Ellie dynamic in future episodes. We also get some light on Ellie's backstory and how she was infected, but if you've played the games or seen the trailers for future episodes, you'll know that she most likely wasn't actually alone when she got bit like she claims. I believe this is set up for a future episode, giving us a flashback of when she got bit along with her friend Riley, who was referenced by Marlene in episode 1, and I do like how while Ellie describes scary stories of infected that she's heard of, she's essentially foreshadowing bloaters and clickers, the latter of which we see in this episode. Speaking of remixed moments, Ellie ringing the bell at the hotel and pretending that it's still functional is one of them. Again, this is something that doesn't happen in the game until after Tess's death, but that's neither here nor there, I suppose. Although it doesn't have the exact same charm as when this happened in the game, I still appreciate the show for throwing that moment in and doing the best with it that they could. I also like how the show is sticking with the idea of Ellie not being able to swim, which has some larger implications later on in the story, mainly the bridge moment from the game. That being said, I doubt we'll see Joel push Ellie around on floating pallets, but that's quite alright for me. As far as the moment between Joel and Ellie goes while they're waiting for Tess to open the door, it kind of fell flat in my opinion, but I like the concept of Joel having to boost Tess up to do so in the first place, as boosting someone up to a high ledge to help get around obstacles is a constant trend in the game. So we get an interesting revelation about the infected that wasn't in the games, which is that many are linked together by the fungus as sort of a hive mind. Although it feels like they're just ripping off Stranger Things in regard to stepping on a tendril, awakening any monsters nearby, apparently the real life fungus that the show's infection is based off of actually somewhat has this quality to it, so I guess I'll let it slide. That being said, it's interesting how they decided to incorporate this hive mind ability, yet they took out the other main ability that the fungus has in real life, being the airborne spores that can affect you in secluded areas, but more on that in a moment. And I like how the show bases the clicker area in a museum, which is the same early game level that you play in after leaving the quarantine zone. I think the show did a brilliant job setting the stage for our first clicker appearances, from Joel and Tess demanding Ellie to stay silent, along with hearing clickers before you actually see them. Then in regard to the clickers themselves, they look absolutely amazing while pretty much staying completely loyal to the game. I believe the clickers are made with mostly practical effects too, which I really appreciate. The whole clicker confrontation was extremely exciting and satisfying, especially when you see how much trouble just a few of them can cause, which again stays loyal to the game in regard to them already being a huge threat alone, while being practically impossible to defend against in bigger groups to the point that you just have to run away. I also like how Joel pushes over a statue to distract a clicker while reloading around the corner, which really gave me flashbacks to the game having to frantically reload while chucking bottles and bricks as distractions. Now throughout this whole clicker ordeal, Ellie actually gets bitten for a second time, which is completely original to the show. At first I was scratching my head wondering why they do this, but jumping ahead for a moment, it turned out to make Tess trying to convince Joel that Ellie's immunity is real just that much more convincing, and I think it worked. Now in the game, Tess compares how she's already feeling horrible from a bite that happened an hour ago, compared to Ellie still being fine with a 3-week-old bite. But the show having Ellie freshly bitten at the same time as Tess is a direct comparison that works just as as well, if not better. Ellie getting bitten again may also be a replacement for the spores situation that I alluded to in my episode 1 review. See, in the game, just shortly after Tess's death, you go down into a metro tunnel that's filled with spores, so Joel puts on his gas mask, but he's incredibly surprised to see that Ellie can inhale the spores without a gas mask, no problem, which personally proves to Joel that her immunity is in fact real. I'm unsure if we'll see something similar to this in episode 3 that convinces Joel of her condition in the show, or if this second bite is supposed to be that convincing factor. Let me know what you think in the comments below. Anyways, I like the subtle detail of Joel telling Ellie to wrap a bandage around her bite mark, which again is the animation that gets shown when you heal in the game. Also, I think the show did a great job with the iconic "is this everything you hoped for" moment, as Joel and Ellie appreciate the view on a rooftop after crossing a plank. This is of course because Ellie's never been outside the quarantine zone in the real world, so Joel is asking her opinion of it, which is something nice to see at the beginning of their journey, considering it gets called back to later on, which I assume we'll also see in the show as well. And so I suppose this is as good of a time as any to appreciate all the beautiful scenery and cinematics in this episode. I predicted that we'd hopefully see a lot of breathtaking locations in the overgrown city this episode, and I'm happy to say I wasn't disappointed. From the skyscrapers crashing into each other near the beginning of the episode, to them walking along the overpass, to this rooftop moment, the show's doing a great job depicting the wow factor that made the world in The Last of Us so impressive in the original game. Sure, there's a few moments in the show where you can clearly tell that the scenery isn't real, but I still appreciate what they were able to accomplish. So, just like I thought, episode 2 ends with Tess's death, which I'm incredibly happy with, mostly, with the first half of the Capitol building scene going down exactly how it did in the game. They find the Fireflies dead, Tess frantically looks for a map, Joe tells her that it's over, but her inability to give up on the mission clues Ellie into the fact that she's infected. Now, although the show accurately depicts this scene from the game, it doesn't feel as impactful due to the context of it. See, in the game, after dealing with some infected, Ellie compliments Joel and Tess on knowing how to handle themselves. Joe responds by stating how it was just luck, something that will eventually run out. This is why Tess saying our luck had to run out eventually in the Capitol building caused Ellie to realize that she was infected, as it was a callback to their conversation earlier. Correct me if I'm wrong, I skimmed through the episode trying to find this, but I don't believe we actually have the original conversation about their luck running out in the show, which caused the Capitol building realization to kind of fall flat and feel out of nowhere, since there wasn't that earlier conversation about their luck running out to set up this realization reveal. So Joel asks to see Tess bite, which she reluctantly agrees, saying oops in the process. I mean, everything here is brilliantly done, even down to Tess being bitten on her shoulder in the same spot and saying the same thing. Now, as a side note, in the game there's a clear moment where Tess probably got bit due to Joel getting split up with her and Ellie, since when you reunite with them, you see that Tess is already in a struggle with an infected. Again, correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't think you actually see a moment where Tess is struggling with a clicker in the show, such as the way that you see with Joel and Ellie, which leads me to believe that she was bitten off screen. And then sure, Tess falls over, but that's just due to her clumsiness of not watching where she was going. However, this caused her to get split up from Ellie, which is where I believe Tess was bitten off screen. Now, I do like how the show portrays Tess being secretly bitten by the clickers, explaining away why she was so rushed to get to the Capitol building, such as not enjoying the rooftop view with Joel and Ellie, along with becoming so dedicated to complete the escort mission with Ellie, as she already knew that her life was running on a very short clock, which was quickly running out, which again, all the exact same as in the game. Anyways, then we get the moment where Tess compares her bite to Ellie's, convincing Joel to take her and continue on with the mission, but this is where the show starts to branch off. Instead of some Fedra soldiers randomly showing up like in the game, Tess sacrifices herself to take out a horde of infected, which I think works a lot better story-wise. The Fedra soldiers showing up in the game was kinda random, followed by Tess being shot after only taking down 2 of them as you try to escape, which kinda made it underwhelming, especially when you consider the fact that her sacrifice only slowed the soldiers down so much, with you then having to either sneak past them or take down the rest of them as you escape the Capitol building yourself, which again leads into that spore moment in the metro tunnel that I mentioned beforehand, but I digress. It makes sense how the show would want to remix Tess's sacrifice, so having her blow up the entire building while she's still in it with a huge horde of infected was a much better choice, especially since the horde gets foreshadowed earlier on in the episode. That being said, I do have a few minor gripes and issues with Tess's final moments. The first outlier is the whole infected kiss moment, which really left me feeling off-put. I get that the infected wasn't actually making out with her or anything, but that's definitely what it was supposed to look like, with the show creators' intentions of it being an incredibly gross moment for shock value. Now I see a ton of copium online defending how this actually made sense, from how infected spreads the fungus through the mouth tendrils to infected doing so calmly with Tess due to already sensing that she's somewhat infected, essentially already one of them, explaining away why the infected slowly spread the fungus into her mouth to, I guess, quicken her transformation process instead of just devouring her like a normal zombie would. Even with all that in mind, to explain why it's realistic, it still somehow felt unrealistically off-putting to me. We never saw anything like this in the game, which makes me wonder if we'll see something like this again on the show, or if it's just a one and done thing to make Tess's death more dramatic. So long story short, even though it technically makes sense, I still kind of feel off-put by it. I also understand the intensity of Tess struggling to light the Zippo as her final act as a human while the infection takes her over and starts to control her body, but it just felt a bit forced to complete the dramatic moment. I mean, why did she have to use the Zippo? Like, why didn't she just blow herself up by pulling the pin on one of the grenades? This is why it felt a bit forced, as the show decided to use the Zippo while she's getting mucked on by the zombie instead to complete the intense moment the way that they had envisioned. Also, although the explosion clearly blew up the entire building with the full horde still inside, the way that so many infected just run past her while she's first struggling to light her Zippo made it feel like she was failing to accomplish her own sacrifice. And I get how that's the point, but realistically, with how many ran straight past her and towards Joel and Ellie, it made it feel like some would have gone out and chased them down before the building exploded. Finally, the way that the show depicts the hive mind is sort of ambiguous in a way that I'm unsure about, as it feels like it'll only come into play whenever the show creators conveniently need it to. This is because although we're explaining the idea of the infected having a hive mind throughout the fungus, it's not one big global hive mind or anything, but instead various pockets of little hive minds. The thing is, these hive mind pockets don't seem to be in a circular radius or anything, but instead only have specific infected linked up in ways that will artificially push the story forward in the situation that the creators want. Due to this, it felt a tad forced instead of realistically having infected detect you from all around you in a circular radius of your position. So all of this is to say that although I completely understand what the show is going for in regard to Tess's death, although I mostly agree with and like the way it was remixed, it felt a tad too contrived and off-putting for me to really get behind it, at least the final few moments. Also, the way that the show depicts how the infected are linked by having a huge horde essentially do the wave as the sun shines on them is a pretty hilarious moment that I think was supposed to be taken seriously as like a deep serious moment, they're all connected, but I couldn't help but laugh. Anyways, even with my mild disagreements and nitpicks for how this episode went down, I still want to emphasize how much I still liked it. The visuals were breathtaking, the clickers were mind-blowing, and I can appreciate and respect the show for doing some scenes and dialogue one-to-one with the game, but then remixing and elaborating on certain moments that they think they can improve on. So I believe in my last video I gave episode 1 a 9 out of 10, and I think that I'd give this episode like a 7.5, 8 out of 10, mainly just due to the minor nitpicks that I mentioned. Even so, episode 2 was still really enjoyable, and I'm still looking forward to the rest of the season. So I'd appreciate a like on the video if you've enjoyed anything I've said today, as it'll help appease the YouTube algorithm, spread my Last of Us videos to a wider audience that may also be interested. Let me know what you thought about episode 2 in the comments below, and I'll be back next week to discuss episode 3. So with that in mind, subscribe for more Last of Us content in the near future. Also, most importantly, I thank you all so much for watching, especially until the end of the video. And until next time, I'll talk to you guys later. Peace out!